You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Dusty's long ride. The sun, a furnace in the sky, scorched Dusty's shoulders. Patches ambled onward, his hooves a metronome marking time against the desert's vast stillness. Heat mirages rippled on the horizon, elusive promises of water. Dusty strained her eyes, battling the pangs of hunger and the persistent ache in her phantom limb. 3 days of near starvation had passed since their last meager meal, a handful of dried apricots pilfered from a forgotten wagon. "Just a little further, old boy," she rasped, stroking the damp curve of Patch's neck. The horse's ears twitched, a silent affirmation. Shifting in the saddle offered no respite from the discomfort. The ghost of her right leg throbbed a dull protest. Behind closed eyelids, memories flickered, the roar of the stadium, the taut leather of the reins, the exhilarating jolt of a wild bronco. Dusty Rivers, the rodeo queen. Now simply Dusty, a diminished figure chasing a desperate hope. The doctor's pronouncement echoed in her mind, "You'll never ride again." A life sentence delivered without appeal. Though her current mount was a far cry from the arena, it was still a form of liberty. Opening her eyes, she reached into her saddlebag and retrieved a petrified biscuit. Snapping it in two, she offered the larger portion to Patches, who accepted it with a grateful nudge of his velvety muzzle. "Easy now," she murmured. "We need to ration." She nibbled at her share, the stale taste doing little to soothe her roiling stomach. Guilt pricked at her conscience. Patches deserved better than this endless trek. He was her only anchor in this desolate expanse. As the afternoon deepened, the terrain remained stubbornly the same, a monotonous tapestry of sand and sparse brush stitched beneath an indifferent sky. Just as her resolve began to fray, a mirage on the horizon coalesced into something real. Structures. A settlement. "Patches, look," she croaked, her voice rough with disbelief. She spurred him onward, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Could this be salvation? A place to finally find respite? As they drew nearer, the town revealed itself, a huddle of weathered buildings clinging to the earth. A saloon with swinging doors, a general store boasting a faded sign, a blacksmith's forge spewing plumes of dark smoke. Humble, but a town. Dusty slowed Patches to a sedate pace as they approached the first building, her gaze sweeping the faces of the townsfolk. Most ignored her, their features etched with the harsh realities of frontier life. Then she spied a crudely painted sign outside the saloon, "Bartender Wanted." A surge of adrenaline coursed through her. She had shaken cocktails aplenty during her rodeo days. It wasn't glamorous, but it was employment. Gathering her courage, she dismounted, her legs unsteady as she found her balance. Leaning heavily on her crutch, she made her way toward the saloon, Patches shadowing her steps. The saloon doors groaned open, revealing a dim interior alive with low voices and the clink of glassware. A few faces turned in her direction, a mixture of assessment and suspicion in their eyes. Behind the bar stood a stout man, polishing the counter with a practiced hand. He looked formidable. Dusty approached the bar, her boots kicking up dust motes on the worn floorboards. She braced herself against the counter. "Excuse me," she began, her voice barely audible. "I saw your sign. I'm looking for work." The bartender scrutinized her, his gaze lingering on her missing limb. A fleeting shadow, compassion, perhaps, crossed his face, then vanished. "Ain't got no use for cripples here," he said flatly, turning away. "Try your luck elsewhere." Dusty's hopes plummeted. Rejection was an old ache, but it never truly dulled. Swallowing her pride, she persisted. "I'm a hard worker," she insisted, her voice gaining strength. "I can mix drinks, clean tables, whatever you need." The bartender remained unmoved. "I said, we don't need your kind. Get out." Dusty stood frozen for a moment, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She had traveled so far, invested so much hope. Now she was back at the starting line, hungry, exhausted, and utterly alone. She turned and shuffled toward the door, the tap of her crutch a mournful counterpoint to the saloon's boisterous hum. As she emerged back into the blinding sunlight, she found Patches waiting patiently, his eyes conveying a quiet concern. She forced a smile. "Come on, boy," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "Looks like we're moving on." The endless desert stretched before them, offering only more trials and uncertainty. But as she remounted Patches and steered him toward the setting sun, a defiant spark ignited within her. She wouldn't surrender. Not yet. The roadside collapse. The desert sun hammered at Dusty, each ray a fiery brand searing her skin. Her vision blurred, the already desolate expanse swaying precariously. Patches trudged alongside, his normally sprightly tail drooping, mirroring her distress. Dusty's grip tightened on the reins, her knuckles gleaming bone-white against the weathered leather. Just a bit further, she willed herself, a flimsy shield against the encroaching shadows dancing at the edge of her perception. Each step was a monumental task, her prosthetic a dead weight dragging her down. The leather bit into her skin, a persistent, irritating reminder of her limitations. Her last real meal was a distant memory, the meager jerky rations depleted long ago. Patches, too, was suffering, his ribs starkly visible beneath his dusty coat. A pang of guilt shot through her as she glanced at him. He deserved respite, not this slow torment. The air radiated heat, bending the horizon into a shimmering mirage. Dusty blinked, attempting to focus, but the dizziness swelled. She stumbled, finding purchase on Patch's sturdy flank. He halted instantly, turning his head, his brown eyes pools of concern. "Steady, boy," she croaked, her voice hoarse. "Just a little lightheaded." She strained to move, but her legs betrayed her. They gave way, plunging her to the ground. The impact reverberated through her, a jolt of agony. The world swam before settling into a blinding white sky above. Patches nudged her gently with his soft nose, a low whicker rumbling from his chest, expressing his anxiety. Dusty reached out, her hand trembling, and stroked his velvety muzzle. "I'm fine, boy," she lied, the words leaving a sour taste in her mouth. "Just need a moment." But the moment stretched into an eternity, sprawled in the dirt, her skin baking under the relentless sun. Her head pounded, her stomach roiled, and her limbs felt like iron. She attempted to rise, but her body refused to cooperate. A wagon rattled past in the distance, the sound a cruel mockery in the immense silence. Dusty strained, hoping against hope that they would notice her. But the wagon rolled on, disappearing beyond the horizon, leaving her once again in her solitude. Another wagon followed, then another, each passing without pause, the drivers either oblivious or indifferent to the figure prostrate by the roadside. Dusty watched them fade into the heat-drenched distance, despair washing over her like a tidal wave. She was unseen, a forgotten relic in this brutal, unforgiving land. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. She hadn't wept since the incident. She'd prided herself on her fortitude, her indomitable spirit. But now, helpless and prone, she felt utterly broken. Patches remained at her side, his warm breath a small comfort against her face. He nudged her again, then lowered his head and gently licked her cheek. His devotion was a palpable presence, a reminder that she wasn't entirely forsaken. She knew she couldn't linger there. She had to rise, had to persist. But the will to persevere had vanished. She was simply weary, famished, utterly and desperately alone. The darkness beckoned, a seductive escape from the torment and anguish. She slipped away, the boundary between consciousness and oblivion dissolving. The final sound she registered before succumbing to unconsciousness was the soft whicker of her horse, a mournful sound resonating in the vast emptiness of the desert. A rancher's kindness. The sun blazed down, baking Caleb Blackwood's Stetson as he patrolled the dusty track. Heat waves danced above the cracked earth, blurring the distant ridges. Fence line duty, a chore that amplified the solitude of ranch life, had him feeling adrift. His sprawling property, ordinarily a point of pride, sometimes morphed into a gilded cage. A sudden shadow broke the monotony. Something inert sprawled near the roadside, just beyond a scattering of sun-scalded rocks. He checked Comanche, his dependable Appaloosa, and squinted. Could it be a person? He dismounted, looping the reins around a gnarled mesquite, his hand instinctively finding the familiar weight of his revolver. Closer now, the shape resolved into a young woman, face averted, dark hair curtained against the sun's onslaught. A well-worn saddlebag sat nearby and a crutch leaned precariously against a boulder. Caleb knelt, the ground radiating stored heat. "Ma'am?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of concern. No response. He gently rolled her over. Her skin felt like parchment, flushed crimson, and her lips were split and bleeding. Shallow, ragged breaths escaped her. He knew the telltale signs of acute dehydration and exhaustion. A knot of fear clenched his gut. He hadn't seen a soul all day. Delay meant certain death. A faint pulse flickered beneath his fingers. He had to shield her from the relentless sun, get fluids into her. His gaze swept the area, landing on the abandoned crutch. Then he noticed the altered cut of her jeans over her left leg. A prosthetic, bringing stark reality into sharp focus. Her situation was critical. "Hang on," he murmured. Words meant more for himself than her. Abandonment was not an option. He retrieved his canteen, carefully dispensing a few precious drops onto her parched lips. Some trickled down her chin, but he persisted, coaxing her back from the brink. After an agonizing pause, her eyelids fluttered open. A soft groan escaped her as she turned her head, her dark eyes glazed and unfocused. "Easy," Caleb soothed, his tone reassuring. "You're going to be all right. I'm getting you help." She blinked, her gaze finally locking onto his. He saw bewilderment, suspicion, and a fleeting undercurrent of fear. "Water," she rasped, her voice a mere thread. He brought the canteen to her lips again, allowing small sips. She drank with desperate eagerness, her throat working. He eased the canteen away when she paused. "Thank you," she whispered, still barely audible. "Don't try to talk," Caleb instructed. "Just rest." He couldn't leave her exposed on the ground. The nearest town was hours away, an impossible journey for aid. His ranch was closer, a desperate gamble. He studied her, assessing her stature. Even weakened, she possessed a wiry strength. But coupled with her injured leg, "I'm going to lift you onto my horse," he said. "Think you can hold on?" A weak nod, her eyes drifting shut once more. Gently, Caleb gathered her up in his arms, surprised by her lightness. He carried her to Comanche, who remained calm, ears swiveling with mild curiosity. He carefully settled her onto the horse's back, positioning her to lean against him. "Hold tight," he commanded, mounting behind her. He secured her to him, wrapping a steadying arm around her waist. "We're headed to my ranch. It's not far now." He urged Comanche forward, the horse adopting a deliberate, measured pace. The woman remained unresponsive, her body relaxed against his. He felt the heat radiating from her feverish skin, the accelerated rhythm of her heart. He knew nothing of her, her origins, or what brought her to this desolate place, but one fact resonated: he wouldn't let her perish. He would bring her home, nourish her, and restore her to health. He owed her that much. Furthermore, something about her resilient spirit and vulnerability resonated with him, stirring a long-dormant ember within. A sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As Comanche carried them across the sun-scorched landscape, Caleb gazed down at the woman cradled in his arms and silently pledged, "I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you." Welcome to Blackwood Ranch. The drive to the ranch felt like a dream. Dusty drifted in and out of consciousness, the rhythmic rumble of the truck tires a lullaby against the backdrop of her pain. Each time she opened her eyes, the same strong jawline and determined gaze of the man who'd rescued her filled her vision. He hadn't said much, only offering sips of water and a few reassuring words. She clung to those words like lifelines. The landscape transformed. The harsh, unforgiving scrubland gave way to rolling hills dotted with grazing cattle. Fences stretched as far as the eye could see, and then, in the distance, a cluster of buildings shimmered in the afternoon sun. As they drew closer, the buildings resolved into a sprawling complex, a ranch house built of stone and timber, surrounded by barns, stables, and corrals. Blackwood Ranch. It was grand, almost intimidating. Dusty, used to the cramped confines of cheap motels and dusty rodeo grounds, felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. Caleb pulled the truck to a stop in front of the main house. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. He turned to her, his expression softening. "We're here. Maria will take good care of you." Before she could protest, he was out of the truck and opening her door. He scooped her up again, his arms strong and sure beneath her. This time she didn't resist. The exhaustion had seeped into her bones, leaving her with no fight left. The front door opened, and a woman with warm, brown eyes and a welcoming smile stood on the porch. Maria. Her face was etched with concern as she took in Dusty's pale complexion and Caleb's burden. Dios mío," Maria murmured, her voice thick with worry. "What happened?" "Found her out on the range," Caleb explained, carrying Dusty inside. "Dehydrated and injured. Needs your magic touch, Maria." Maria ushered them into a large, airy room, filled with comfortable furniture and the aroma of simmering herbs. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the scene. She directed Caleb to a large, soft sofa. "Careful now," Maria instructed, her hands fluttering around Dusty like a hummingbird. "Let's get you comfortable." Caleb gently laid Dusty down. Maria immediately began assessing her injuries, her touch gentle but firm. She frowned as she examined Dusty's prosthetic leg. Been through a lot, haven't you, Mija? She said softly, her gaze filled with compassion. Dusty mumbled something unintelligible, her eyes fluttering closed. Let her rest, Caleb, Maria said, her voice firm. I'll make her some broth. She needs to regain her strength. Caleb nodded, his brow furrowed with concern. Thank you, Maria. I don't know what I'd do without you. He lingered for a moment, his eyes fixed on Dusty's sleeping form, before quietly leaving the room. Maria worked quickly and efficiently. She cleaned Dusty's cuts and abrasions, applying a soothing balm that smelled of lavender and honey. Then she covered her with a soft, hand-stitched quilt. The warmth seeped into Dusty's chilled body, easing the ache in her muscles. When Dusty finally stirred, the room was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Maria was sitting beside her, knitting needles clicking softly. The aroma of chicken broth filled the air, making Dusty's stomach rumble. Welcome to Blackwood Ranch, Dusty, Maria said, her smile gentle. I've made you some soup. It will do you good. Dusty sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. Maria helped her to a sitting position and placed a steaming bowl in her hands. The broth was rich and flavorful, laced with vegetables and herbs. Dusty ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, savoring each spoonful. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. As she ate, Maria watched her with a knowing look. You've been through a lot, child, she said softly. But you're safe here now. We'll take care of you. Dusty didn't know what to say. She had never experienced such kindness before. She was used to fending for herself, to relying on her own strength and resourcefulness. The idea of accepting help, of allowing herself to be vulnerable, was terrifying. Thank you, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I don't know what to say. Maria chuckled softly. Don't say anything, Mija. Just rest. You're home now. Home. The word echoed in Dusty's mind. It was a word she hadn't used in a long time, a word she had almost forgotten. But as she looked around the warm, inviting room, as she felt the gentle warmth of the fire on her face, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she belonged. Finding her place. The aroma of cinnamon and roasting peppers pulled Dusty from sleep. For days, all she'd known was the sterile scent of antiseptic and the musty smell of the desert clinging to her clothes. This was different. This was welcoming. She eased herself up in bed, her muscles protesting with a dull ache. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting stripes across the hardwood floor. The bandage on her leg felt tighter, but the throbbing had subsided. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, wincing slightly as her bare feet touched the cool floor. Reaching for her crutches, she slowly made her way towards the enticing smell. She found Maria in the kitchen, humming a tuneless melody as she stirred a pot on the stove. The room was a riot of color, strings of dried chiles hanging from the rafters, hand-painted tiles lining the walls, and copper pots gleaming in the sunlight. Buenos dias, Dusty, Maria said, her smile as warm as the tortillas she was patting out on the counter. You're up early, or maybe I'm just an early riser. Good morning, Dusty replied, her voice still raspy. It smells incredible in here. Breakfast of champions, Maria declared, gesturing to the pot. Huevos rancheros. Want to help? Dusty hesitated. I don't want to get in the way. Maria chuckled. Nonsense. You can chop some onions. Just be careful with that knife. Dusty found a cutting board and a knife and began to carefully dice the onions. The familiar task grounded her, the rhythmic chop chop chop, a welcome distraction from the swirling uncertainties in her mind. She hadn't felt useful in, well, she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt useful. As they worked, Maria told stories about the ranch, about the Blackwood family, about the changing seasons and the endless cycle of life and death on the land. Dusty listened, absorbing the details, feeling a flicker of connection to this place she'd only just arrived at. After breakfast, Dusty felt restless. She couldn't just sit around all day. Is there anything else I can do? She asked Maria, who was wiping down the counters. Maria considered for a moment. The horses need tending. Caleb usually takes care of them, but he's out checking fences today. You know horses, don't you? Dusty's face lit up. Know them? They're in my blood. Maria smiled. Then go. They'll be happy to see you. The stables were a short walk from the house, the air thick with the scent of hay and leather. Dusty leaned against the fence, taking it all in. The horses, a mix of sleek quarter horses and sturdy mustangs, shifted restlessly in their stalls. She recognized the signs: boredom, a lack of attention. She found a brush and a curry comb and started with a chestnut mare named Belle. As she brushed, she spoke softly to the horse, her voice low and soothing. Belle responded instantly, nuzzling Dusty's shoulder. Soon, Dusty was moving from stall to stall, grooming and talking to each horse, her touch gentle and confident. She cleaned hooves, checked for injuries, and refilled water troughs. She moved with a purpose, her earlier hesitation gone, replaced by a quiet competence. The stiffness in her legs seemed to ease with each task. Caleb found her there hours later, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. He stood silently for a moment, watching her. She was covered in dust and straw, her hair pulled back in a messy braid, but she looked at peace. He cleared his throat. Dusty looked up, startled. "Caleb," she said, a hint of embarrassment in her voice. "I hope you don't mind. I needed to do something." He walked closer, his gaze sweeping over the horses. They looked healthier, happier than he'd seen them in days. "Mind? They haven't looked this good since my grandfather was alive. You have a way with them." Dusty shrugged, her cheeks flushed. "They just needed some attention. And you needed something to do," he added, his eyes meeting hers. She didn't deny it. "Yeah," she admitted. "I did." He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Well, you're welcome to help out anytime. We can always use an extra hand around here." Dusty looked around at the horses, at the sprawling ranch, at the endless sky above. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a place for herself here. Maybe she could even belong. Shadows on the ranch. A pre-dawn nip iced Caleb's face as he patrolled the south pasture's edge. A nagging disquiet had plagued him through the night, a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. The horses had been skittish in their stalls, even the ranch dogs, typically unflappable, seemed jumpy. He'd attributed it to the incoming weather the radio had warned of, but as dawn bled across the horizon, he recognized a deeper cause. The severed fence was his first clue. Wires clipped with precision, almost professionally done. Next, he spotted the sign, a multitude of hoofprints pressed deep into the earth, all angling south, away from the heart of the ranch. A cold fist clenched his insides. Cattle. Gone. Caleb kicked Diablo into a run, chasing the trail until it vanished on the unforgiving dirt of the county road. He swore, pulling back on the reins. These thieves were seasoned. They'd herded the livestock directly onto the public thoroughfare, obliterating their tracks. Back at the house, a pall of apprehension hung heavy. Maria was already up, her face creased with worry as she set out breakfast for the crew. "How many had gone, boss?" Jed, the foreman, asked, his voice taut with concern. Caleb raked a hand through his hair, frustration tightening his shoulders. "Looks like 20, give or take. And choice stock at that." A low rumble of displeasure rolled through the room. "Rustlers," someone muttered, the word hanging in the air. "Rustlers for sure," Caleb confirmed, his tone sharp. "And damn brazen ones, hitting us so close to the ranch buildings." "Maybe they've been watching our movements," Maria suggested, her brow knitted. "Figuring out when we're stretched thin, checking fences or moving the herd." "Time to ride out," Jed declared, pushing away from the table with a scrape. "See if we can pick up the trail on the far side of that road." Caleb gave a curt nod. "Saddle up. We'll split into 2 groups. Jed, you take Mateo and circle west. I'll head east with Ben." He paused, his gaze encompassing the worried faces around him. "Keep your wits about you and your rifles close. This isn't kids' play." Dusty, who'd been quietly helping Maria clear dishes, stopped still, drawn to the kitchen by the raised voices. The raw anxiety in the air, the word rustlers, struck her like a thrown stone. This ranch, this sanctuary that had unexpectedly embraced her, was now threatened. She rinsed a plate with deliberate slowness, absorbing every detail of the conversation. Talk of branding irons, stolen cattle, and the potential for violence swirled around her. A knot of fear tightened in her chest. She knew what it meant to feel like dead weight, a burden. But this was different. This was her home, her newfound family. And she refused to passively watch it be violated. Drying her hands on her apron, she felt a surge of determination. She might not be the rider she once was, but she knew this land intimately. The labyrinth of canyons, the hidden paths, the secret watering holes were etched in her memory. And she understood cattle. Better than most, truth be told. As the men streamed out, grabbing their hats and weapons, Dusty lingered, her pulse quickening. Maria turned, her expression softening with concern. "Don't fret, child," she murmured, laying a comforting hand on Dusty's arm. "Caleb and the boys will sort this out." Dusty managed a faint smile, her eyes betraying her unease. "I know they will, Maria. But I want to help." Maria sighed softly. "Dusty, honey, you're still healing. You need your rest. I am resting, Dusty insisted, a spark of defiance flickering in her eyes. But that doesn't mean I'm useless. I can track. I can scout. I can be of some use. Maria studied her for a long moment, her gaze filled with understanding. I get it, Dusty. I truly do. But this is a dangerous situation. You need to be cautious. Dusty nodded, her resolve firming. I will. But I can't just sit here and do nothing. As Maria turned back to the stove, Dusty slipped out of the kitchen, drawn towards the barn. She didn't have a concrete plan, but she knew she couldn't remain idle. The ranch was under attack, and she was determined to find a way to protect it, to prove her worth, limitations or not. As dusk painted long fingers across the ranch, Dusty prepared to venture into the shadows. Dusty's pursuit. The desert air, rapidly surrendering to the night's chill, whispered of dust and sage. Dusty knelt beside the scarred earth, her fingers ghosting over the deep gouges left by driven hooves. This wasn't the work of amateurs, these were seasoned rustlers. They possessed a grim familiarity with the terrain, expert at obscuring their passage, nearly. Then she saw it, a subtle scuff in the dirt etched lightly beneath the starlight. A missing heel caulking from a horseshoe. She filed away the detail, a faint clue shimmering on the trail. This land was etched in her very being, every dry creek bed, every jagged peak, every hidden game trail a well-worn memory. Caleb and his gang would likely adhere to the beaten paths, their movements predictable. She could intercept them. All right, Patches, she murmured, stroking the mare's soft muzzle. Let's show them what rivers are made of. Patches responded with a snort, her hooves impatiently scraping the ground. Dusty adjusted her blanket saddle, the tightness a welcome pressure, and swung aboard, the familiar throb in her leg a dull ache against the rising anticipation. Helpless was a word that didn't apply. A rivers, born and bred in this harsh country. She knew its secrets. She urged Patches into a swift lope, veering west, a course divergent from Caleb's expected route. The wind howled in her ears, carrying the mournful cry of a distant coyote. The moon, a thin crescent in the vast darkness, painted elongated, surreal shapes, twisting familiar landmarks into phantoms. Dusty's gaze swept the horizon, sharp and unwavering, seeking any telltale sign, any betraying flicker. She wasn't just riding. She was conversing with the landscape, deciphering its subtle cues. A snapped branch, a displaced scattering of gravel, the faint, acrid tang of cattle on the breeze. All whispers in her ongoing search. The hours dissolved into the steady cadence of hooves and wind. The cold intensified, stinging her exposed cheeks. Doubt, a creeping vine, began to entwine her resolve. Was this reckless? Was she simply a hindrance? Maria's concerned expression surfaced in her thoughts. She banished the uncertainty. She had to act. This ranch, this place, it was home. And she would defend it. Then a glimmer. A soft radiance staining the horizon, a constellation of orange specks against the inky void. A campfire. Encircling it, the unmistakable silhouettes of men and stolen cattle. She slowed Patches to a quiet walk, inching forward, leveraging the meager cover of the scrub brush. She dismounted, tethering Patches to a gnarled mesquite. The mare offered a soft wicker, her breath pluming in the frigid air. Dusty advanced on foot, her boots hushed by the sand. The campfire popped and hissed, casting erratic shadows on the faces clustered around it. She recognized one, Jed Barlow, a notorious cattleman notorious for his violent tendencies. 5 in total, their faces weathered and unforgiving. The stolen herd was huddled together, their eyes reflecting the embers lowing softly into the quiet night. Dusty's pulse hammered in her throat. Alone, unarmed, outnumbered. But retreat wasn't an option. She'd found them. Now came the reckoning. She withdrew her phone, flinching at the sudden light before quickly dimming the screen. No signal. Naturally, she shoved it back into her pocket. Her eyes darted around, assessing the surroundings, seeking any advantage. A rocky bluff loomed nearby, offering the possibility of a better view. She had to close the distance. Drawing a deep breath, she moved again, her senses heightened, each footfall deliberate and silent. The fate of Blackwood Ranch and her claim to a place within it hinged on her subsequent decision. Confrontation and rescue. Dusty squinted against the wind, strands of hair lashing her face as she observed the rustlers driving Blackwood's prize herd into a makeshift pen. Vile figures, their faces maps of avarice and heartlessness, worked with grim efficiency. Jed Barlow's voice, laced with cruel satisfaction, cut through the air. Cinch 'em tight, boys. Black will be wettin' his sheets tonight. Dusty's breath hitched, a surge of adrenaline coursed through her. She tightened her grip on the crutch, its well-worn wood a familiar anchor. They couldn't get away with this. Not from Caleb. Not from the ranch she called home. With surprising alacrity, she stepped from the meager shelter of the sagebrush. Hold it right there. Her voice, though not loud, sliced through the scene. The rustlers, startled, swiveled to face her, disbelief etched on their faces. A sneer contorted Jed Barlow's features. Well, looky here. If it ain't little crippled Dusty. Gonna whack us with that stick? Dusty ignored his jibe. Those are Blackwood's. Turn them loose and clear out. Barlow barked a laugh, a grating, unpleasant sound. You and who else, sweetheart? He gestured toward his cohorts, each seeming more brutal than the last. We're just holding 'em for ransom. Blackwood won't even notice a few missin'. He will, Dusty insisted, her tone hardening. And he'll be looking. You don't want to be here when he does. A bluff, her phone was dead and Caleb was miles away. But she needed to stall. Barlow advanced, his eyes glinting. You know, Dusty, you always were a burr in my saddle. Thinkin' your hot stuff 'cause you straddled a few bulls. Well, that ain't gonna cut it anymore. Now scuttle back home and let us finish up. He reached to shove her aside, but Dusty reacted swiftly. With practiced ease, she swung her crutch, the strike against his arm landing with a solid crack. Barlow bellowed, clutching his limb. You little witch, he spat. He lunged, but Dusty sidestepped, using her crutch for leverage. Strength she lacked, but agility she possessed, keenly aware of how to weaponize her limitations. The other rustlers closed in, forming a ring around her. Dusty knew she was facing impossible odds. She wouldn't yield. Abruptly, a shout reverberated through the clearing. Hold it right there, Barlow. Caleb Blackwood rode into view, followed by a posse of his ranch hands. Relief flooded Dusty as she saw him, his face a thundercloud of rage. He was every inch the lord of the land, powerful, protective, and undeniable force. Caleb. Dusty managed, her voice raspy. Barlow's face drained of color as he recognized Blackwood. The advantage had evaporated. Blackwood, he stammered, we were just, movin' these dogies to fresh graze. Caleb dismounted, his eyes blazing like twin suns. Those cattle were headed for the state line, Barlow. Don't insult me. He signaled to his men. Round 'em up, boys. And make sure these fellas don't leave with any souvenirs. The ranch hands moved with practiced efficiency, swiftly turning the cattle back toward the Blackwood spread. Barlow and his crew were rooted to the spot, their swagger replaced with stark fear. Caleb approached Dusty, his features softening as he reached her side. Dusty, are you hurt? What happened? They were rustling your herd, Caleb, she said, her voice trembling almost imperceptibly. I tried to stop them. His gaze traveled over her, assessing for injuries. You shouldn't have confronted them alone. It was too risky. I couldn't just watch them steal your cattle, she countered, lifting her chin in defiance. This is my home now, too. Caleb's eyes locked with hers, a complex tapestry of gratitude, worry, and an emotion she couldn't quite name swirling within their depths. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her temple. You're one of a kind, Dusty Rivers. He pivoted back toward Barlow, his voice now a honed blade. Get off my property, Barlow. And if I ever catch a whiff of you near my cattle again, you'll be begging for the sweet release of death. Barlow and his band of desperados scrambled onto their horses and bolted, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the faint tang of fear. Once the last of the stolen cattle were secure, Caleb turned his attention back to Dusty. He saw the weariness etched on her face, the slight tremor in her hands. She wouldn't admit it, but the ordeal had shaken her. Come on, he murmured, sweeping her into his arms. Let's get you home. Dusty offered no resistance. She nestled against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat a soothing balm. As Caleb carried her back to the ranch house, she understood that she had discovered something more than just walls and a roof. She had found a sanctuary, a place where she was cherished, and a man who saw her, truly saw her, with all her strengths and vulnerabilities. A new beginning. The dust settled, coating the newly acquired cattle and the long-held anxieties that had shadowed Dusty. The ride back to the ranch became a jubilant procession of appreciative pats and nods. Even Mayor Thompson, ordinarily as unbending as weathered timber, clapped her shoulder, his features softened with authentic admiration. Dusty Rivers, he declared, his voice amplified by the open air, you possess more backbone than most folks I've met. At the ranch house, Maria's worry-lined face dissolved into relief as she embraced Dusty fiercely. Ay, mihija, she whispered, you nearly gave me a heart attack. But you shone, truly shone. That evening, swaying gently on the porch swing alongside Caleb under a sky pierced by a million distant lights, Dusty experienced a serenity she'd never imagined. The swing's soothing cadence, the tender graze of Caleb's hand, the pungent aroma of sagebrush riding the gentle wind all blended into a rich harmony of belonging. Words spread like wildfire, Caleb murmured, his tone a comforting warmth. "They're calling you a savior." Dusty gave a self-deprecating snort. "A savior with a limp." Caleb gently guided her face towards his, starlight dancing in his eyes. "That limp salvaged our livelihood, Dusty. It redeemed me." He reached into his pocket, his movements deliberate. In his open palm rested a ring, a slender silver circlet adorned with tiny turquoise stones mirroring the depths of her own gaze. "Dusty," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Words often fail me, but I cherish you. I admire your spirit, your heart, your resilience. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled, blurring the celestial panorama. Old insecurities stirred, whispering doubts. Could she, a former rodeo star dimmed by injury, truly deserve this man, this future? But gazing into Caleb's eyes, witnessing the steadfast affection mirrored there, the doubts evaporated like a desert mirage. "Yes," she breathed, her voice catching. "Yes, Caleb, I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, its cool touch a reassuring anchor. He drew her close, his embrace a haven. "I vow," he murmured into her hair, "to dedicate my life to your happiness." The following weeks unfolded in a flurry of preparations. Maria, naturally, orchestrated everything, transforming the ranch house into a whirlwind of activity. The comforting fragrance of baking bread mingled with the delicate perfume of wildflowers, and cheerful voices resounded through the rooms. Dusty, initially taken aback, discovered a genuine enjoyment in the bustle. Maria patiently guided her, assisting with the selection of a simple yet exquisite gown, a creamy ivory creation with delicate lace sleeves that veiled the scars on her arm while allowing her indomitable spirit to radiate. The wedding day dawned crisp and radiant. The ceremony unfolded in the meadow behind the ranch house, beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient oak. Wildflowers erupted in a vibrant tapestry of color, and butterflies fluttered like confetti. The entire town gathered, their faces glowing with warmth and goodwill. Even Jed Barlow, appearing humbled and contrite, stood at the edge of the gathering, a silent tribute to Dusty's valor and Caleb's magnanimity. As Dusty proceeded down the aisle, relying lightly on a beautifully crafted cane Caleb had fashioned for her, her gaze locked onto him. He stood at the altar, striking and dignified in his dark suit, his eyes brimming with a love that stole her breath. The ceremony was unpretentious yet deeply moving. Tears streamed down Maria's face as Dusty and Caleb exchanged vows, pledging their enduring love and commitment. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, a joyous roar erupted from the assembly. That evening, under a canopy of shimmering stars, Dusty and Caleb shared their first dance as husband and wife. As Caleb spun her around, she noticed the heartfelt smiles, the genuine applause emanating from their friends and neighbors. A profound sense of belonging washed over Dusty. She was home. She was cherished. She was at long last unequivocally free.